Hi friends, if you're like me, you're a poem, or you're a photographer that wants to talk more about editing in Lightroom using the new masking feature, which is pretty cool. If that sounds like you, we should talk. So today we are going to be talking about the new masking features in Lightroom, which are really cool. They work with the gradients, they can auto-select subjects, auto-select sky, and you can make special changes to your photos based on that alone. It's different from the stuff that they had introduced before. A couple of versions ago, Lightroom had introduced the ability for you to fine-tune masking based on luminance or color. So if you just wanted like a bush, like one bush to be a red bush, you could make that bush a red bush, which is pretty cool. And I'm gonna show you a bunch of examples of both practical and like impractical, just playing around with stuff, ways that you can use it. I will start by saying, I don't know if I'm making these images better, because sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I just wanted to show you guys what this feature is capable of in case it gives you ideas or you guys can use this in the future. I also wanted to say there's like a strip of light that keeps showing up on my body. My lighting isn't good right now, and I have come to accept it, and I hope in time you can come to accept it too. But I'm really sorry. Lighting isn't good right now. But I really wanted to get this out. I asked you guys on Instagram what we should do, and it was a three-way tie between 3 different topics. So I'm going to cover 2 of those this month and the other 2 next month, because it made me feel so good thinking that I just had no bad ideas and that you guys wanted to hear all of them. So I want to do them all now. But today we are going to get into this. So first, I'm just going to show you where the new masking tools are. So in the develop panel, you just click on this little circle guy with dots around it, and it allows you to add a new mask. You can add a new mask by selecting your subjects, by selecting the sky, or all of the other options are still here that were previous here, using a brush tool, linear gradient, radial gradient, color range, and luminance. Those are things that were introduced in the past couple of versions. But for this photo, we are going to click select subject. My goal for this image is, I feel like the background is fine, but maybe their heads blend in with it a little bit. So I'm gonna select them. It actually does a really great job selecting the subject. I can sort of zoom in and show you guys how good this looks. It even feathers things where it might be dubious, like where it's seeing these little hairs, it's sort of feathering things out, but it's doing a really great job selecting things. What I'm going to do is I'm gonna turn off show overlay and I'm going to invert, because what I want to do is select the background. And if I wanted to, I could fine tune this, but honestly, it's been fine because the changes that you want to make in this are going to be very minimal. Otherwise, it just looks too dramatic in a way that doesn't look great, which I'm also going to do and show you how bad it can be. So I'm just going to bring down the exposure a little bit. I'm going to back up so you guys can see what I'm doing. And I would say a stop and a half is obviously way too much, but I could bring it down like a half a stop. That's like 0.5. I feel like that looks pretty good. If I wanted to, I could add some clarity to the background. That would maybe make me want to drop the exposure down a little bit more. I could change the color. I could warm it up a little bit if I wanted. I could cool it down. I don't think I'm going to do either of those things. I feel like it mostly looks fine as is. But if you want to see your progress, you can just click on and off on this eyeball. I've just made the background a little bit darker. If I wanted to, I could just select the sky here, but I feel like they aren't popping from the background as much as I want them to in this example, where I'm going to change things that I would probably never change whenever I'm delivering them to people. But I'm going to select the subject and I'm going to show you what I might do to this image. I don't really like just selecting the subject, so I'm almost always going to go to invert to make my changes. I'm going to make it the background a little bit darker. I feel like that looks pretty good, but I'm going to warm it up ever so slightly because I feel like their skin tones are warm enough, but I really want to make the background like a little bit more glowy. And I can show you what this looks like if I turn it off and on. That's fine. They stand out from the background a little bit more. I would say this is successful. And I can also do the opposite here. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to select my subject because there isn't really a lot of sky for us to go from. And I'm going to hit invert. I think that looks pretty good. I'm going to hit dehaze. And this is something that I really like for this area because it was already a little bit hazy in the background. So this is a little bit too dramatic, but I'm going to bring dehaze down quite a bit. I'm going to bring down my exposure a little bit, maybe some clarity, just a little. I'm going to warm it up so we've got this really nice golden warm light coming from behind them. And since I feel like it's starting to look a little weird at their feet, I am going to go to subtract linear gradient, and I am just going to erase by their feet so that it looks a little bit more natural towards the bottom. I like that. I feel like they stand out from the background a little bit more. So the thing that's cool is that you can use them to make a photo look completely different in a way that wouldn't have been possible if you just would have like brought a light on a light stand. So I'm going to select my subject here, invert, so I'm just messing with the background, and I'm just going to change the hue. I can literally make this a completely different photo just by changing the hue. I was already playing with this photo and I added just a ton of masks. So I'm going to start over and show you what I did. So for this image, I blew out the sun. You can see I've got a big hot spot right there. So I'm going to edit them for how I want them to look. And I'm going to turn on my masks, select subject, invert, and then I'm going to start playing with the background so that they stand out from it a little bit more. I'm going to make the sky a little bit darker because I want it to be a little bit darker behind his head, but then it really emphasizes the sunspot back here. I'm going to cool it down, reduce the contrast. I might bring dehaze down a little bit. And I am going to subtract linear gradient and make sure that their feet sort of blend so it's not doing anything weird right there. The next thing that I want to do is I'm going to create a new mask that is a radial gradient, and I want to make that sunspot just a little bit bigger so it looks intentional, not like I'm trying to recover the sky. What I want to do is subtract select subject. What that does is it creates the radial gradient behind them. So now everything that I'm doing will not affect them in any way. So I'm going to go ahead and boost my whites. I'm going to pretend like I didn't blow it out. Like, yeah, it was always like that. I'm going to, decrease contrast. I'm going to dehaze it a little bit more, maybe. Warm it up just a little bit more. Play with exposure. I feel like that looks pretty good. This is just the radial gradient. I'm going to turn all my masks on, and I think that looks pretty good. But I'm going to do one more. I'm just going to do a linear gradient, and I'm going to pull that in right here, and I'm going to darken the sky a little bit more. So I'm going to subtract select subject. I'm going to turn off my show overlay, and I'm just going to see what that looks like. I'm going to dehaze, then cool it down, and I can still go in here and like move things. So I'm going to turn my masks off and just show you what this looks like. I feel like this feels a little bit more balanced. I really like this bright spot right here because it doesn't just look like I blew out the sky, even though I did. I feel like it's a little bit softer, the light's a little bit hazier. I like it, amen. One of my favorite aspects of this is that it doesn't have to be a practical solution. I'm gonna mask my couple, I'm gonna invert it, and all I wanna do is just play with the coloring of the sky. I feel like it's too blue there, and this is cherry blossoms. I really want to just add to sort of like the warmth that they have on their skin tones right now. So I'm going to warm things up. I made things pretty pink. I'm going to dehaze. It's like one of my favorite things to do. It makes things all hazy in the background. Bring down the exposure maybe a little bit, dehaze a little bit more. I feel like before the mask, they stood out from the background in a way that I didn't like. And here I feel like they're a little bit more integrated with their surroundings. And I also feel like the cherry blossoms look a little bit more pink and pretty in a way that I really like. I much prefer this sky over this one. This is a session where my clients were running an hour late, so the lighting isn't what I wanted it to be, so I will take any help getting the lighting to look a little bit more like early morning lighting, which I think this does. This is another one that I was playing with, and I'm going to turn off the mask to show you what that looks like. I don't feel like this looks like my processing at all, but I thought it would be a good thing to show people in case this is something that you wanted to do. So I am going to delete all of the masks and start over so we can look at that. Delete all masks, and I'm going to start by selecting the sky. I'm going to bring down my highlights, maybe my exposure just a little bit. I think I'm going to warm it up because the rest of this image, except for the sky, is really warm. Next, I am going to create a new mask, and I'm going to select my subject. Let's see, I could brighten them up a little bit, but I feel like the blacks get away from me really easily. I don't love any of this. So instead, I'm just going to hit invert, and I'm just going to bring the exposure down around them. I do think reducing contrast helps a little bit. Let's see, bring my whites down a little bit. I'm going to create another new mask, and I'm going to do a radial gradient, and I'm going to add some brightness to the sky behind them. I'm going to click on mask and go to subtract because I want to subtract my subjects. And I'm just going to try warming it up, brightening it up, adding some dehaze. I don't love that. I feel like that looks pretty artificial. I'm going to play with it a little bit and see what I can get. By bringing this out and making the inside a little bit smaller, it creates more of a gradual gradient. It's way too big. And it's way too bright. I'm going to turn my mask on and off just to show you kind of what I've got here. I feel like this is softer. It's a little bit prettier. That's a little bit closer to my processing than the one that I originally did. But I feel like it goes to show that you should play with these options and see if you get anything you like. I'm going to show you another really practical one. So this is a ceremony. I had no say over what the lighting looked like, where it was, or anything. So they were in a very shaded area with a beautiful view, which was, of course, completely blown out. And they put them in front of these two tall flower stands which just meant that they looked really busy. So I think for this, if I had this ability to select my subject, invert, dehaze, and brighten up the background a little bit, even though it's not my favorite look that I've ever seen, it does make the image look a little bit less confusing in a situation where I had no power over how things were looking. You guys know that I love blue hour portraits. I do a lot. But if I do them too close after sunset, I don't necessarily get the deep blue skies that I really, really want. But I'm going to show you how you can kind of play with blue hour pictures in Lightroom. I'm going to select my subject, invert, because what I want to do is play with the background. And then I'm just going to bring down my exposure. And since my light was very, very orange there, I think I could make my sky a little bit warmer and even add some like pink to it to add a little bit more dimension. And then I'm going to bring my exposure down just a little bit more. I feel like this is a little bit deeper and moodier than this. I think that this is really romantic and nice, and the sky was just a little bit too bright here. I might actually go to my mask and add some clarity to bring out some of the textures in the background. Maybe bring up my whites a little bit, bring down my highlights. How's that? I like that. Ooh, yes, big fan. So you can do the same thing with sparkler exits. You can select your subject, invert your selection. If you're getting any rando people in the side, all you have to do is go to the mask, add linear gradient, and you can kind of take them out. You can also use a brush. You just want to be careful with this because you can get carried away. And for this, I'm going to turn off my show overlay so you can see what I'm doing. If you add dehaze, it looks like it was just very smoky when they did the sparkler exit. But if you add dehaze a little bit, it creates a little bit more contrast between them in the background. You just want to bring down the exposure. You could even warm things up in the background a little bit so that you're really putting an emphasis on the lighting on them. Again, I don't know if that I have made this photo better, but you can see that it is dramatically different. So it's another way that you can have your subjects kind of stand out from the background. So one place that I'm really excited about, because I think that it's the trickiest place to shoot, is in forested areas. It's so easy for my subjects to get kind of lost in forested areas. There's a lot of intersecting lines, a lot of like visual noise. And one thing that I think is really fun is this image. We already have a little bit of the sun peeking through, creating a little bit of a halo around them. I'm just gonna play it up a little bit. So I'm gonna start by creating a radial gradient and popping that into the sky right there behind them. I like that. I'm gonna turn off the show overlay so you can see exactly what I'm doing. I'm gonna increase the exposure, maybe make it a little bit warmer, maybe dehaze it a little bit so it starts to look like a real sun flare. And then I'm going to click on my mask and subtract my subject. So I'm going to go to select subject, and it should just get rid of my clients from that radial gradient. So everything's behind them. Pretty cool. So I'm going to turn my mask on and off. And you can kind of see what that looks like. If I feel like the placement isn't right, it's still going to retain where my subjects are, but I can start to move that around behind them and play with placement a little bit. But I feel like that looks pretty cool. Probably a little bit dramatic. One thing that I was talking to Sam about is that these things can get carried away pretty easily. And we both agreed that whenever you figure out something that you feel like looks pretty good, dial it back like 50% and you're probably going to be there. So I've increased it 1.66. I'm going to take it down to like 7.5. Let's see how that looks. That looks pretty good actually. So I'm going to turn my mask on and off. And I feel like they're separated from the background in a way that helps them really stand out, but it doesn't look artificial. This is another situation where I feel like my subjects just really aren't standing out. And I try my best to find my backgrounds and sort of place people in situations where they are going to stand out from the background, but it doesn't always work like that. So I am going to select my subjects, invert my selection. I'm just going to play around with the background. I'm going to decrease my exposure. I'm going to dehaze it just a little bit, subtract some of my contrast, make it a little bit darker. And I'm going to subtract linear gradient, and I'm just going to pull it from the bottom so that way their feet are a little bit more integrated with the rest of the processing that we're doing. I feel like this looks okay, but I really liked the hot spot that I had over here, so I'm going to create a new mask and go to radial gradient. We're going to create a little hot spot back here. That might be too big. I might be feeling regrets already about this. All right, so I'm going to increase my exposure. Ooh, I'm going to make it a little bit warmer. I'm going to dehaze just a little bit. And I've got this nice little hotspot happening over here. And I feel like my subjects really pop from the background in a way that they weren't before. Another practical solution that I wanted to share is you can create a mask, select subject. In this example, I feel like the background is just too blue. So all I want to do is warm up the background. Literally just invert selection and warm it up so that I think it matches the tone of their skin. So if I turn off that mask, you can see that the background just matches the tone of their skin a little bit better. So one thing that kind of sucks is that there isn't a great way for you to sync these AI selected subject masks on other images. So I have this image and I really want to replicate that on a couple other images in the series. But if I copy and I go to masking, it's going to give me an error saying that AI-powered selections need to be recomputed on the target photo. So even if I copy it and I apply it to another image that I want to do the exact same masking technique, I will still have to go to my masking, click on the mask that has an error and hit update. It'll redetect the subject and then you'll have your stuff applied, but it's like an extra not fun step. So I don't see this being something that I'm using on a bunch of different images, but sometimes for the occasional fun one that I just want to do something a little bit different to, I think it can be really helpful. And I'm really loving this. I'm seeing a lot of potential. I also see the potential for me to get very carried away with things. I have something that is called Fog Forecast. There is a website called Lens Distortions, and I don't know how I got these or why I got these, but there are some fog presets that you can download that work with Lightroom. And I am going to show you what those look like right now because it is a cool thing that I couldn't figure out how to use in Lightroom ever that I think could be fun to play with here. But it's literally brushed on presets that you can put on different images. So here's fog, a bunch of different types of fog. I'm going to use this fog horizontal, and I'm going to move it where I want it. But I am going to subtract my subjects. Now I can play with this, I can decrease it, make it a little bit less silly looking, but there are lots of different types of presets like this that you can use to create really interesting dramatic effects on your work. There's so many different ways that you can play with this to help your subject stand out from the background in situations where maybe you did your best, but your best just wasn't good enough, which is exactly what my situation was here. I'm going to turn my mask on and off so you can see what this looks like. It completely changes the mood, the vibe, everything about the photo. And I was playing around with these on a bunch of different photos so I can show you what they look like. But I'm literally just doing the exact same things over and over. One of my favorite things to do is decrease dehaze to help my subjects stand out from the background, and I feel like it gives them Pacific Northwestern lighting just a little bit, or like California lighting. I think the effect that it has on night shots is especially incredible. And I think it's cool that Lightroom has other options other than selecting for specific color gradients, which is a pretty cool thing that you can do, and now you can select your subjects too. For the most part, I'm not using this to alter my subjects. I'm using it to alter the background. There are a couple of times that I found where I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty practical for times where I was like, oh no, don't go there, where I definitely wouldn't have put my clients. But I do think it's really fun to play with on a couple images to help them stand out from the background or to create warmth and shadows in a way that sort of helps to create this visual harmony. So I definitely recommend playing with it. There's a lot of different stuff you can do, some of it practical, some of it not. I do think it's going to be really, really helpful for shooting in wooded situations where you're not able to find like those really nice little pockets of light that I'm always on the lookout for, but you can't always find them. If you have any questions at all, definitely let me know. Thank you guys so much for weighing in and voting on Instagram. I really wanted to talk about this, so I'm glad you wanted to talk about this too. I wish you guys the best of luck in your editing queue now that it's November and we are all editing for October. I wish you the very best of luck. I'm right there with you. Thanks for listening. I will talk to you soon. Bye.